TopMedTalk.
Well, welcome to TopMedTalk. I'm Desiree Chappell, and we are coming to you from the 5th Collaborative Clinical Trials in Anaesthesiology Meeting here in Prato, Italy. I'm joined by Editor-in-Chief Monty Mythen. Hello, Monty.
Hey, Desiree. Great to be here.
It is great to be here, actually. We just are in our second day, but we wanted to sit down and do a quick summary of the takeaways from yesterday's meeting. Before we do that, though, I really want you to explain what this meeting is, because a lot of people don't even know it exists. And I think there's a lot to be gained by just kind of taking it back there.
Well, this meeting, which you say is the 5th, this is the second one that I've been to. It runs every 2 years. It's organised by Monash University. Now, people know Monash University is in Melbourne, in Australia. So what are we doing sitting in Prato in Italy, which is just north of Florence, apart from the fact that it's a very beautiful place, and why wouldn't you want to come here? Well, it's Monash University made a decision a number of years ago to acquire some real estate here, so part of their European presence is in Prato in Italy. So we're sitting at the moment in a courtyard in a piece of real estate owned by Monash University, which is here as an education centre. Now, why every 2 years? Well, the meeting is all about large clinical trials, predominantly large pragmatic randomized control trials, but trial methodology is discussed, alternative methodology, and it's a relatively small, low hundreds of people who are here by invitation only. And pretty much the invitation is determined by whether you have a track record as a clinical trialist or an expert communicator. And we are here wearing our TopMedTalk hats by invitation from Professor Paul Miles, because we're a very effective communicating platform, as are some of the major journals that are represented here. So, it's an amazing treat. It's a really, really packed program. People are given a relatively short period of time to predominantly share with us the initial results from the large trials that are in the pipeline, under review and or in press. So the bad news for our listeners is we're going to tell you almost nothing about the results because of the embargo rule. But what we can do is give you some nice teasers about what's about to come out. And hopefully it's not the sort of meeting where typically interview people, because everyone's trying to keep a lid on everything. But we will be able to hopefully get them to give us quick elevator pitches about the trial design and a few teasers.
Yeah, I think there's plenty we can gather from that for sure. This is one of the first meetings where I've gone to where they're like, you cannot say a word. We didn't sign an NDA, but I felt like it was close, which I think it's a cool thing. It is a unique experience, and many of these guys, I've already been talking to them. They can give a short synopsis, so it's pretty good.
Yeah. And basically, if you leak, you ain't coming back.
Yeah, no doubt about that. There's nothing really on Twitter that's going on, which is interesting, but it's all good. So, let's just kind of talk through the program a little bit. So the first trial that was discussed was the balance trial. So,
we've known the balance trial has been due. It's a very large trial, going by what's available in the public domain, which you can find from the published protocols. It's a trial of 6,500 patients looking at different depths of anesthesia judged by the so-called BIS monitor, so a modified processed EEG signal, looking at deeper anesthesia with a BIS of around 35 as the target versus lighter anesthesia with a target level of around 50. Big trial, long-term follow-up with, I think, the primary outcome variable actually being mortality quite a long way out. So, it's a big ask that the depth of anesthesia would have an impact on that, one would say, very patient-centered outcome. There's also, though, a second bit of it. There's the balanced Delirium trial, which we'll come back to in a second.
Yeah, so we'll keep a lookout for that. When do you think that'll be coming out? That's still in the middle of it?
I think the the results were shown here as part of the process of this meeting, but and many of the investigators were in the room, so one would anticipate in the next 6 months you'd see that coming out of a trial of that size you'd anticipate would come out in one of the very large high-impact journals.
So the second trial that we talked about was the BCAR trial. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, that's another trial which has been ongoing for a good while now, difficult to recruit initially, but then got some impetus, ending up with about 2,100 patients. It's a randomized controlled trial looking at the style of delivery of anesthesia, but in particular the use of a paravertebral block for breast cancer surgery. Now, The theory there, the biology behind it, is the suggestion that if you have a good local block, given with this paravertebral approach at the time of having breast surgery, is you get less dissemination of cancerous cells. And also there's other anaesthetic agents either do or don't suppress in certain laboratory situations. So very, very important question. The observational data strongly supporting, and we've recorded some data on this from TopMedTalk, the observational data strongly suggesting that the regional block should produce a better outcome. But now we have a result, and we look forward to seeing it published.
Yeah, hopefully we'll keep an eye out for that as well. And then the next study was the NeuroVision study that was presented by PJ Devereaux.
So NeuroVision study is a subset of a very large study, Vision. The NeuroVision component of it was doing brain MRI scans. So a number of the institutions, a number of the patients put their hand up and said within that very large Vision trial, they would go ahead and have MRI scans of the brain within, as I understood it, within 10 days of surgery, such that one could look to see if there were any signs of brain damage, of any sort of occult strokes that appeared on the brain scan that were not obvious clinically. And again, something we're all very, very interested in. Some amazing results presented yesterday. So we look forward to seeing that in press coming out fairly soon. I think people are going to be really, really, they're going to be interested in all of these trials. Be careful I don't say too much.
I know, right? We're walking a fine line. It's very difficult. And for me, it's really difficult because I'm like, is that okay to say or not?
Let's reiterate that whatever the result of it is, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean. Because if there are no strokes visible on the brain scan, that's really, really interesting. If there are strokes, gosh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, totally agree. So, okay, Monty, let's come back to the balanced trial, but the delirium portion of that. Liz Everett presented.
Yeah, so remember the main balanced trial we said was about 6,500 patients. This was a subset in the region of about 550, 600, as I took from it, where they looked in greater detail at whether there was delirium in patients, measured meticulously, because one of the arguments about delirium trials is how meticulously the delirium measure was made, and they did it using some alternative different methodologies that are well validated. The team that was running it, Liz Everett, for example, extremely experienced in this area, and that will give us a message as to whether the depth of anesthesia, same as the balanced trial, 50 versus 35, is associated with higher or lower incidences of postoperative delirium.
Yeah, that was really interesting that they chose those numbers and talked about that. I look forward to seeing that for sure. The next thing that we talked about was from Ramani Moonsingh about the SNAP-2, the EPICS risk analysis of a traditional cohort. Tell us more about that.
So SNAP, people will be familiar with these national audits that we run in the UK, and this is a sprint national audit project. So it's done in a short period of time, typically a day or a few up to a week. This particular one was 2 days. And this was looking at the risk prediction of surgical outcomes using a number of different verified tools, the PPOSM, the Surgical Risk Scale, and the Surgical Outcomes Risk Tool, or SORT. And these are very, very high levels of engagement, these trials. So typically, tens of thousands of patients coming from almost every hospital in the NHS reporting their outcomes. And this, as Ramani says, is so-called citizen science. So almost complete compliance of a country to join in. And they'll be telling us in the results what is the relationship between a gestalt, for example, in other words, the clinician's opinion of risk of patient, and the scores with regards to prediction of risk of patient. Now, the interesting twist in this version, the EPICCS version of it, the SNAP-2 EPICS, is this is a tri-nation project. So Australia and New Zealand have also joined in with the UK to report these outcomes. So that'll be a very interesting twist.
So then we got to hear from Toby Richards about the PREVENT study, which I was really interested in.
So PREVENT study has been recruiting for a long period of time. It was Toby told a compelling story about the journey. I was personally there at the beginning of the PREVENT trial journey. Toby Richards working at University College Hospitals in UCL at the time, answering a very important question in major non-cardiac open abdominal surgery about whether the treatment preoperatively with intravenous iron therapy It reduces the number of, well, actually, slight twist here, reduces blood transfusions. I'll come back to the twist in a second. Reduces length of stay, reduces complications, and has a positive impact on the health economics. So relatively large trial, up into the hundreds of patients. A long time recruiting it because it was destabilized en route. By in 2016, some guidance coming out suggesting that we should be giving intravenous iron, even though Toby's efforts then going back to the people who wrote the guidance to say, hang on a second, you can't recommend this when it's not evidence-based, or we wouldn't be doing the trial. So the twist is many of the people who've been using intravenous iron clinically now have been reporting a marked reduction in transfusion of blood in particular. Toby, for his primary outcome variable, for various different reasons, he explained it, his perspective was as a surgeon, was dichotomous, like did you get a transfusion or didn't you get a transfusion? The primary outcome variable does not factor in how many transfusions you got. So when looking at the results, we're going to see that sliced and diced in different ways, but the primary outcome variable was that did or didn't patients get a transfusion. Again, out relatively soon.
Yeah, I was going to say that information was coming to him just recently, so hopefully we'll see that very, very soon. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about something that Lars Eriksson was going to present. He wasn't able to, but Paul Miles and Deminda actually presented on days at home after surgery as outcome measures and as an outcome measure in surgery. That's the first time I'd ever really heard of that. So can you kind of break that down first and then tell us what they had to say?
Yeah, so it'll be familiar that it's not unusual for people to report outcomes after surgery as being the typical list of mortality, length of hospital stay, readmission rates, and major complications. Now, the length of hospital stay is often confused by the fact that in some countries patients are sent to an intermediate care facility. So if you look at some of the US trials, for example, they report that although patients were out of hospital in a median of 8 days, for example, 40% of them went to a skilled nursing facility. So this outcome variable, which has been proposed in different guises for a number of years, either called days at home or happy days is another version of it, is if you look at a 30-day period, so after surgery, so you start counting on day one after surgery. In those 30 days after surgery, how many of them did you spend at home? So if you left hospital after 3 days and you stayed at home, you weren't readmitted or didn't go to an intermediate care facility, your DAH30 score would be 27. So if you stayed in hospital for 10 days, it would be 20. If you stayed for 5 or were readmitted for 10, and so on. So, therefore, it is the number of days somebody spends at home. It doesn't factor in yet whether they were happy or unhappy, but it's taking the people who are at home are highly likely to not have major complications. Now, and I'll come back to the if you died twist in a second. In this session, there were 2 different reports. The first one was by Paul on behalf of Lars Eriksson, who is from the Karolinska Institute, who sadly couldn't make it at the last minute, was using a national data set to try and validate the DAH30. So using days at home 30, looking at the massive numbers of patients and looking at and this is already published, so this we could talk and will talk later in greater detail about, is if you looked at the major complications and the severity of major complications, how did it relate to the DAH30? And basically the DAH30 seems to be a very reliable measure of the fact that people not only were at home, but they were at home complication-free. So there's a match between the two. So it's being proposed not only as an outcome variable for clinical trials, but it's also being proposed as a quality measure for your hospital. So don't go back home and tell me what's your median length of stay for a hip replacement. Tell me what your DAH30 is for your patients who get hip replacements. How many days do they spend at home? At home includes the fact they go out shopping and enjoy themselves, but you know what I mean, that they're living back in the home they came from, as opposed to in hospital somewhere else, or dead. Now the dead twist in it is to, if they use the methodology whereby if somebody died in the 30 days, they were allocated a 0. So they're saying that's such a bad outcome. understandably, that if you died in that 30-day period, even if you went home for 20 of them, then you were allocated a 0 days at home. So when you see it reported. The second presentation, which was from Daminda, was to go on, and, which they've already published as well, was to look at whether you chose a 30-day window, a 90-day window, or a 180-day window made a difference to the value of the measurement. And the conclusion from that was basically that 30's as good as it gets. You can go to 90, you can go to 180, you get slightly different messages, but it's probably just not worth the effort. So DAH, days at home, 30, DAR 30, new outcome variable.
Interesting. I hope we have some greater conversations about that in the near future, because I think that you can see that definitely as an application in what we've been doing. So next was one of my favorite presentations of the day. It was my favorite presentation of the day. It was very moving. I'm going to just turn it over to you so you can tell us a little bit about ASOS 2.
That was Bruce Bickard, who is a clinical academic from Cape Town in South Africa, one of the lead movers, shakers and trialists in Africa, who's been pushing for a long time to say this is a continent that is underserved by the availability of data and the engagement in clinical trials, recognising that also many of the countries are so resource poor that that's a difficult challenge for them. So this is building on ASOS 1, which people can look up, the A standing for Africa, and it all relates to surgical outcomes. Some of the figures Bruce showed us at the beginning was basically the World Health Organization reckons you need about somewhere in the region, or most of our developed countries have about 20 to 40 doctors per 100,000 of population. Africa as a continent has less than one. So it's got a 40th to a 20th of what most of us are used to experiencing. And their outcomes pretty much across the board are very poor. He also showed us a slide about clinical trials being conducted in Africa, and his conclusion was essentially there are none, and that has resource implications that relate to it. So he also concluded, therefore, that if you are going to do trials in Africa, they have to be quick, they have to be easy to deliver, they have to be resource light, and they have to have what he called super lean data. Basically saying it may a super light case report form, so about half a page of A4 with all the sensible information on it. He's saying what he's trying to do was to engage the whole country, so to get leaders in each country and try and get as many hospitals engaged as possible. He's trying to do a very large trial using a cluster process. So this means that, and a step wedge process. So you bring sites on board, and in the clusters, which are the individual hospitals, they've got to aim to recruit 100 patients as a minimum for a maximum period of 4 weeks. So if they get to the 100 patients within 4 days, then they stop, if you see what I mean. If they get to the end of the first week and they've recruited 300, they stop, whatever. But if they've only got 25 at the end of the first week, they carry on up to 4 weeks. And if before they get to 4 weeks, they've got 100 patients, they stop. If they never get to the 100 patients, they stop at the 4 weeks. And so far, he's got 42 national leaders in Africa and 283 hospitals that are signed up. 85 hospitals are already recruiting and 15 have finished so far. And when he showed us the list of African countries that are engaged, it was really, really impressive. There were all but 7 countries. And when you look at the countries that haven't been able to engage, you would understand why they might not be able to engage in the moment. There are some countries that have engaged who actively have civil war ongoing at the moment, who've regarded this as being so important that they are recruiting patients. I spent a number of years ago, finishing up as a medical student, a number of years in Zimbabwe, an absolutely beautiful, amazing country, which has gone through some really, really, really hard and torrid times. And Bruce was emotional when he spoke about that, understandably, to say that he didn't actually think there was going to be a way that with their difficulties they would be able to join in. But having almost the whole of Africa covered, and then what they're looking at is whether, by using a very simple methodology, just raising the awareness of higher risk patients and what a high-risk patient looks like when they start to deteriorate, that they think and hope they will make a difference to outcome. But whether they do or they don't, this first major step in demonstrating that using this technique they can join in large clinical trials is a fantastic step forward. And I think the general conversation afterwards was sort of shame on us. Yeah. You know, we're spending so much time and energy and effort, money, doing trials on it's important in our healthcare system, but in reality, pretty small print compared to the challenges that they're facing in Africa. Wouldn't it be better if we all diverted a little bit more of our resource in their direction?
Absolutely. It wouldn't have to be that much, really, to make a huge difference there. So, well, thanks, Monty, for going through day one of the fifth collaborative clinical trials meeting, anesthesiology meeting here in Prato. Look forward to having some further conversations throughout the next couple days.
TopMedTalk.
Nate Majerison here. Thanks for listening to TopMedTalk. Now, before we let you go, it's important that we remind you to subscribe to TopMedTalk. That way you'll never, ever miss another episode. Also, if we could encourage you to join us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, pretty much every single social media platform, we're there. Join us. And finally, check out TopMedTalk.com. If you go to our website, you can subscribe to email updates. That way we can always tell you where we're going to be, what we're going to be doing, and how you can join us. TopMedTalk.com and click on the section marked email updates. Finally, TopMedTalk is proud to act as the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about them as well. ebpom.org is their website. That's ebpom.org. And if you go to ebpom.org/meetings, you can find out about some of the wonderful meetings that we attend and cover across the year here on TopMedTalk. That's ebpom.org/meetings.